Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, super patriots, fellow crackpots, members of the Constitutional Underground, Republicans, and fellow Democrats. I'm mighty glad to be here again. Once upon a time, a hunter and his dog were lost in a deep forest. Out of food, the starving hunter sat by his fire one night, and finally he could stand it no longer. He whipped out his knife and whacked off his dog's tail and put it on the fire to boil. When he was through, only the clean bones were left, and he tossed them to the whimpering dog, who devoured the remains and then licked his master's hand in gratitude. That's the story of federal aid. Uncle Sam, the grateful dog, is us. Dogs can live without tails, but the hunter is still famished. We can't have federal aid and freedom. There's no place now or ever in the history of the world where they've had a full dose of federal aid and freedom. We shouldn't have federal aid and freedom. The Supreme Court has ruled, and in that instance I agree, that which the government subsidizes, it should control. Federal aid is federal control. Federal aid is our own blood, a continuous transfusion in which the bureaucrats keep 1/3 for their own use. The subsidy-happy American people, with the enthusiastic cooperation of the communists and the socialists within and without, are destroying the land of the free and the home of the brave. In America today, 1/4 of the people are living off of the other 3/4, completely or partially. In socialist America today, 48 million people are getting regular government checks. That's roughly, and it is rough on those of us who pay the bills and don't get any, one check for every other household in America. That's even rough on the post office delivering them. I dreamed a while back the whiz kids had an answer for that, too, that they were going to start a new department of government, which they are very good at, to integrate with all possible speed woodpeckers and carrier pigeons, to form a pigeon pecker corps. These pigeon peckers would not only be able to deliver the 48 million government checks, but they'd knock on the door when they got there. The demand for more spending and less taxes is immoral, since it requires public theft, not only from us, but from unborn generations. If taxes are cut as the president desires, the deficit will doubtless run $15 billion or so. This means increasing the debt limit again. But so what, the socialists say? We owe it to ourselves. Lord Keynes, the British socialist, sold this philosophy to the late Eleanor Roosevelt's late cousin husband, and the destruction of American freedom was underway. Now, I'd like to say at the beginning that I dislike both parties equally, Socialist Party A and Socialist Party B. I do think the Republican Party could be saved. Switching to a Rockefeller is like leaving a spoiled diaper on the baby and just changing the safety pin. The socialists in control of our country have no intention of balancing the budget. Deficit spending has become a way of life. And unless we have a grassroots rebellion, it will become a way of death for the free enterprise system, more commonly called the American way of life. Deficits and debts are unimportant, say the socialists. The important thing is to keep the country moving, And it is toward dictatorship. In a welfare state, the politicians get well and you pay the fare. Tax and tax, spend and spend, elect and elect, the people are too dumb to understand, said Roosevelt's Schlesinger, Harry Hopkins. Maybe it's time for another Boston Tea Party. If the people are too dumb to understand, perhaps they ought to also be too dumb to continue paying for their own enslavement. One of the excuses of the lying frontier is that most of the spending is for defense. Some of our leaders don't even believe in our defense. Billions in so-called defense spending go for foreign aid to the United Nations and other enemies. Other defense billions go to such things as the National Defense Education Act, providing federal funds to students to study such subjects as anthropology and sociology. The increase in non-defense spending in the past 8 years has been twice the increase in so-called defense spending. Total federal spending for benefit programs doubled from 11.4 billion in 1947 to an estimated 25.8 billion in 1963. Welfare. Most of this is vote buying, federal aid, welfare. The proposed 98.8 billion bankruptcy budget is $500 million more than the total budget at the height of World War II. Continuous deficits are intended and inevitable unless the people rebel. Mere interest on the federal debt costs us $19,000 per minute, around the clock. Interest takes 10 cents out of every budget dollar. Interest eats up more money than the entire size of the debt in the Great Depression. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution provides that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. The Constitution gives the federal government no power or control over agriculture, health, welfare, labor, dams, and other public power projects, education, unemployment, or housing. We can't have a socialized agriculture without having a socialized America. I think one of the reasons we're in the difficulty we're in is that certain segments of our society haven't realized that freedom is one ball of wax. A lot of doctors have just now waked up to the fact, when their own ox is gored, that if we have socialized agriculture, we are going to have socialized medicine and a socialized America, and vice versa. We are going to win or lose the fight for constitutional government, for our republic, on a broad level. You can't win it on one front. Freedom is one ball of wax. Socialism is planned tyranny by the few. It means government ownership or management of banks, railroads, power, newspapers, television, radio, schools, steel, automobiles, and you. Most of us are against socialism, if it's called that. I live in Nashville, the heart of the TVA. Virtually everybody in Nashville is against socialism. As far as I know, there has never been any action by any civic organization in the city of Nashville, any newspaper, Chamber of Commerce, Rotary Club, any organization opposing any raid on the federal treasury for the city of Nashville. Now, we're against Pasadena getting anything. We're trying to get there at the trough ahead of you. Middle of the road of Norman Thomas six-time candidate for President of the United States on the Socialist Party ticket, said, quote, "The American people will never knowingly adopt socialism. But under the name of liberalism, they will adopt every fragment of the socialist program until America will one day be a socialist nation without knowing how it happened." Many years ago, a drove of wild hogs lived in a big bend of the Ocmulgee River in Georgia. They had survived floods and fires and freezes and hunters and droughts. Hunters bragged when their dogs fought the hogs and returned alive. Finally, one gallus man came by the country store on the river road and asked how he could find the wild hogs. All he had with him was a one-horse wagon, an axe, a lantern, some quilts, some corn, and a single-barreled shotgun. Several months later, the hog-hunting stranger came back to the same store and asked for help to bring out the wild hogs. He said they had them over in a pen in the swamp, and people came from miles around to see the captive hogs, which all of the natives knew couldn't be captured. "It's all very simple," droned the one gallus stranger. "First, I put out some corn. For 3 weeks, they wouldn't eat it. Then some of the young'uns grabbed an ear here and there and scampered to the underbrush. Soon they were all eating it. They knew that if they didn't, one of the others would. So then I began building a pen around the corn, a little higher each day. Before long, I noticed they were all waiting for me to bring the corn, and had stopped grubbing for acorns and roots. I built the trap door. Naturally, they raised Cain when they seen I had 'em. But I can pin any animal on the face of the earth if I can first get him to depend on me for a free handout. Fellow hogs, we been fenced. We've been had by one gallus socialist. Let's dig out. Arthur Schlesinger, Jr. says that socialism is the way to oppose communism. Killer Khrushchev is also on record in 1960 saying we cannot expect the American people to jump from capitalism to communism. But we can assist their elected leaders by giving them small doses of socialism until suddenly they awaken to find they have communism. Socialism is the halfway house to communism. We won't have communism until after we've gone socialists. So a good percentage of the ADAs, the brain trusters chosen to run our government, are for socialism as the way to oppose communism. Once upon a time, a hunter cornered a bear in the wilderness and took careful aim at close range. Just before he was about to pull the trigger, the bear held up his paw and says, "Wait just a minute, Mr. Hunter. There's no reason you and I can't negotiate this matter and coexist peacefully. After all you want is a fur coat, and all I'm hunting for here is a full stomach. So let's sit down and talk it over." Well, being a typical American who knows there's nothing to be hurt by just sitting down and talking things over, the hunter agreed. And so they sat down and negotiated. And both did get what they wanted. The bear got a full stomach, and the hunter got a fur coat. We can coexist just like they did, or just like the lion and the lamb coexist. All you have to do is to pitch a fresh lamb in the cage each morning. Khrushchev doesn't have to bury us. Our leaders are burying us. Our leaders are not fighting communism. They are promoting it. The no-win policy of our hidden persuaders calls for improving communism until we can comfortably merge with it. I've seen this no-win policy in operation in various places around the world. It's a bipartisan no-win policy. It's been in existence for many years. Bobby Kennedy, our Attorney General, the most outrageous appointment since Caligula named his horse a consul, and comparable in other ways, ordered the FBI to rouse newspaper men out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning to answer questions about statements attributed to a Steele official. For some strange reason, this reminds me of the Anfuso bill, which is now in the hopper in Congress to make you register your firearms. That's the first step. Once the establishment knows where all firearms are, except those owned by gangsters, the next step of the collectivists is to send gun collectors around to each home to pick them up. It's sort of nice to have an equalizer around for 4 o'clock knocks on the door, regardless of who's knocking. The right of the people to keep and bear arms is guaranteed in the Second Amendment to our so-called out-of-date Constitution. Don't ever give up your firearms. As Hiram Mann said, no man escapes when freedom fails. The best men rot in filthy jails, and those who cried, "Appease, appease," are hanged by those they tried to please. Appeasers are people who feed a crocodile hoping it'll eat them last. America has a great mission to perform, to save the world from slavery, to save the world for Christianity. Let's remember I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something, and I will not fail to do that something which I can do. What can one little person do? First, you can stand up on your feet and be counted. Else you'll soon be counted out. You can believe in your God, in your country, and in yourself, and in that order, and then go to work for God and country. At home, in your church, your school, your club, your neighborhood, your precinct. The situation the American people are in today reminds me of the story of the two skeletons locked in the closet. One skeleton turned the other and rattled. How do we get in here? The other skeleton rattled back. I don't know, but if we had any guts, we'd get out. How did we get locked up in this closet? Now, we conservatives are spending a lot of time, wasting a lot of time, I think, arguing about whether it was planned that way or whether it was a series of accidents. Personally, I think treason is the reason. I think to go to the same cashier every day and get shortchanged is no longer a mistake. We've got people in our State Department who have never made a mistake in our favor. Speaking of mistakes, I heard a story about a girls' school across from Notre Dame that was having an annual dance, and to their horror, they discovered that the Notre Dame team was to be in Chicago, and 30 girls were dateless for that Saturday night. The headmistress rose to the occasion, called a nearby army camp, and told them a predicament, and said, "Could you possibly send over 30 men?" They said, "Why, yes, we'd be glad to oblige." She said, "Well, I'm terribly embarrassed to have to mention this, but you know this is a Catholic institution, and we'd appreciate it if you wouldn't send any Jews." So about 30 minutes before the grand march, there was a knock on the headmistress's door, and she went, and there was a Negro corporal from Alabama, flanked by 29 other Negro GIs, and He saluted snappily and says, "Reporting for duty, ma'am." She said, "My good man, there must be some mistake." He said, "No, ma'am. Captain Goldberg don't never make no mistake." Just a relatively few years ago, when Karl Marx died, there were only 8 people at his funeral. Most of our State Department people were too young to go. In the ensuing few years, the communists have captured more people than Christianity can now count standing after 2,000 years. And our leaders say, "You crackpots, take it easy. There's nothing to worry about." Since 1945, the so-called end of the war, when the communists had 7% of the people in chains, the communists have enslaved 750 million people from within. They now have 40% of the people and 25% of the land mass in chains. And the big red army didn't fire a shot. All the communists have to do is to keep on doing exactly the same things they've been doing, and all we have to do is to keep on doing exactly the same things we've been doing, and their timetable calls for taking us over from within by 1973. And how are we fighting it? We have a team in Geneva, Switzerland now to expedite a disarmament plan, to phase out our entire defense establishment into the United Nations by 1971, Army, Navy, Air Force, which is surrender and slavery. And yet people say, "What do you want to be a crackpot for? What are you so upset about? Have you ever had it so good?" I know a lot of you have been asked that question. I got to say, no, I never had it so good. That's one of our problems. We've become so materialistic that some people can't understand how there could be anything much wrong as long as business is good. What am I upset about? Our government now owes not $308 billion, but more than $1 trillion, counting Social Security commitments, commitments to veterans, total commitments already pledged and unpaid for. We owe more than $1 trillion. We are bankrupt, and bankrupts can't carry the rest of the world on their shoulders. The new frontiersmen tell us, don't worry about that. If we spend enough and lower taxes, eventually we'll profit. Reminds me of the fellow that spent every afternoon out in a little town outside his city drinking beer. And a friend said, "Why do you go out there to drink beer every day? Are you ashamed to be seen in town?" He said, "No, beer's a nickel a bottle cheaper out there." But he says, "It's 24 miles out there and back at 7 cents a mile. How are you saving money?" Well, he said, "I just sit there and drink till I show a profit." That's the economic philosophy of the new frontier. You know, it's very fashionable these days to be a middle-of-the-roader. Stay in the middle of the road wherever it is. It's been moving to the left for 25 years. But some people are determined to stay in the middle. Pontius Pilate was a middle-of-the-roader. He didn't have the morality and the courage to make the decision to crucify Christ. He left it up to the mob to decide, the democratic thing to do. The leftists and the middle-of-the-roaders, so-called, claim that we extremists are dividing and confusing the American people and diverting attention from the real menace of communist gains in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Who caused the communist gains within and without? Was it the so-called right-wingers like Senator McCarthy or Senator Taft, or Robert Welch? No. It was the left-wingers who've been in the saddle, the Roosevelts, the Hopkins, the Stevensons, brought us where we are. And those faceless, anonymous characters in the State Department who can't even be identified, many of them. They remind me of that new deodorant they call Stereo. It doesn't stop the odor, but you can't tell where it's coming from. Why is freedom forever on the defensive? Why are we always reacting instead of acting? We cannot negotiate freedom. We cannot negotiate morality. We have to be willing to stand up for it. We have never won a negotiated victory. The communists have never kept a pledge that amounted to anything, yet we keep negotiating. We have and have had government by misrepresentation, a government which has discarded the Constitution, usurped the sovereignty of the states, robbed the people of their material wealth and their freedom, given away our substance to the world without end, and left us subject to defeat by a foreign power. To save the world, we must save America. I believe that the way to save America, in my opinion, is the same way it was founded, by a grassroots rebellion. If our republic can be saved from socialism, insolvency, and surrender, it'll be saved by us reassuming on the local level those rights, privileges, taxing powers, and responsibilities guaranteed by the greatest freedom document ever devised by man, the Constitution. We won't be saved by the Republican or the Democrat Party. We'll be saved not from the top down, but from the bottom up. When freedom is at stake, our silence is not golden, it's yellow. I'm constantly appalled by business and professional people who say, well, maybe you, John Birches, are on the right track, but you are too controversial. I can't afford controversy. It hurts business. I can't afford to take part in politics. What difference does it make what your profit and loss statement is this month or this year, when the profit system is being deliberately sabotaged by your own leaders? We have many people in government today who don't believe in capitalism, who are working, and I've seen them in Washington and around the world, working day and night trying to bring about a socialist, non-profit, one-world brotherhood, trying to level America down and lift the communists and the socialists up to the place where we can merge as brothers. How could any informed person, how could any moral person refuse to take a stand under those circumstances? Plato said the penalty good men pay for indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. I think we are being ruled by evil men. What can one person do? One man, Nathan Hale, sent chills up spines of generations of American patriots when he said just before he was being put to death, I only regret I have but one life to lose for my country. Sometimes I've wondered if you two spy Powers might be the modern Nathan Hale. Powers was paid $30,000 a year by his government to do a job, and when he was called, he said, I didn't know what I was doing. And if I had have known it, I wouldn't have done it. Thank God we've got John Glenn and Carpenter to offset Powers. One man's vote kept us from killing compulsory military training 4 months before Pearl Harbor. One man unknown today fired the shot heard around the world, and he didn't worry about it hurting his business. He was neither paid cash nor guaranteed any benefits by his government. He just did what his conscience told him to do for his country. You are but one. So were Carrie Nation, Paul Revere, Patrick Henry, Lee, Jefferson, Taft. So was Joan of Arc, and she couldn't even read or write. We can't depend on our leaders. We can't depend on the professionals. You remember back during the Russian Revolution, the business and professional leaders thought that they were smart enough and sophisticated enough to stay on top, regardless of which regime won out. They all ended up shot in the back of the neck, and that's what they deserved. Sadly, we've got a lot of business and professional leaders in this country today who are determined to ride what they think's the wave of the future. Some people can't understand how these Roosevelts, these Rockefellers, why would they be for socialism? Don't forget that communism in its purest essence, true communism, Lenin's Marxist communism, called for an aristocracy of leadership and wiping out the middle class. Somebody's got to run General Motors. Somebody's got to run the steel companies. Maybe these fellows figure if somebody's got to do it, it might as well be they. Donnie said the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who in a period of moral crisis maintain neutrality. If this is not a period of moral crisis, when have we ever had one in the history of this country? We conservatives are constantly attacked for being beginners, wanting to turn the clock back, old moss back reactionaries. We conservatives are accused of being against all change. I think most of us are for change, any good change. But we are not for changing the system that produced the highest amount of freedom and the greatest prosperity known in human history for an age-old failure, socialism. We're not for change just to be changing, like the fellow who just for a change decided he'd start parting his hair crossways ear to ear. And his last remaining friend says, well, how do you like your hair parted ear to ear? And if he said, oh, I like it fine, except for one thing. People always whispering into my nose. Actually, there are so many things to be for that I sort of feel like a mosquito at a nudist camp. I know what I ought to do, but I don't know where to begin. But I'd like to try to tell you a few things that I'm for. I'm for dying on my feet in preference to living on my knees. For a national purpose diametrically opposed to coexistence with history's most atheistic, despotic mass enslavers. For a national purpose dedicated to freeing the half of the world enslaved by the communists. Why don't we have a freedom corps instead of a peace corps? To settle for a world half slave and half free guarantees our eventual enslavement. I'm for a congressional investigation of the State Department. For again teaching the meaning of freedom and patriotism in our schools. For Max Rafferty, for George Washington, the father of our country who never told a lie. Of course, he never did have to fill out an income tax return. For the Liberty Amendment, for people-to-people exchange, for exchanging not millions of tax-free food and drug ransom for the Cuban prisoners, but exchanging 3 people for them, Milton Eisenhower, Walter Reuther, and Bobby Kennedy. for limiting all of our federal elected employees to one term. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's impractical. It takes one term to get in there and know the ropes. Well, that's just the point. You know, most politicians are neither dedicated leftists or dedicated rightists. They're dedicated to staying there. It becomes an obsession with them that overrules everything else. Some cynics say that the answer to the professional politician is just to elect rich people, that they won't have to steal. Of course, stealing has no connection with riches. Most thieves didn't want bread, they want power or mode. Most politicians are like cockroaches. It's not what they steal and carry off, it's what they fall into and mess up. I'm for Drew Pearson, showing what he scored on a lie detector test for each day's column. For Roosevelt, Soapy Williams, Adlai Stevenson, Nelson Rockefeller, and all the other super-rich by inheritance, built-in guilt complex do-gooders sharing their own wealth, and not mine. It's always been particularly nauseating to me that politicians like Roosevelt, whose whole family enriched themselves shamelessly in the public trough, is known as a philanthropist. A true philanthropist is a person who gives of his own self and substance till it hurts. The widow with her two mites. It's not what you give that counts, it's what you have left over. Most politicians are not givers, they are takers. And for the inequality of man, since equal men are not free and free men are not equal. That great authority on communism, Laughing Boy Stevenson, said recently, we have less to fear from communism than from the complexities of modern life. Now, I'll admit Mr. Stevenson's life has been pretty complex, more so than it's made the papers. In evaluating the Communist Menace, Mr. Stevenson's perception reminds me of the story of the drunk who stumbled up on this man barbecuing a chicken on the rotary spit on his patio. The drunk says, "Hey, buddy, what's the matter? Your organ ain't playing and your monkey's on fire." I'm for retiring Adlai to his patio. For giving Red China a seat in the United Nations, our seat. For a law requiring that the total number of federal agricultural employees shall not exceed the total number of farmers. People who won't take a stand deserve to take a fall. I'm for people who will stand up with the majority or alone. I'm for the John Birch Society. Not only that, I'm for Robert Welch. I think the John Birch Society offers the best leadership, the best program, the best results to save our republic from socialism, insolvency, and surrender. And that's the reason for the smear. You know, there are about 2,000 so-called conservative organizations in this country, by count. Most of them have been in existence 25 or 30 years, meeting and eating and retreating. The John Birch Society has done more in 3 years than the majority of that 2,000 organizations. And that's the reason for the smear. It's so-called fascist organization. Do you ever stop to think that every person and every organization that's done an effective job against the communists has been smeared from Martin Dies on down? In the first place, fascism and communism are peas in the same pod. They're the same thing. They're first cousins. Fascism and communism are not opposites. They're at one end of the spectrum because they believe in totalitarianism. They believe in total government and little people. At the other end of the spectrum is anarchy, no government. We who believe in constitutional government, in little government and big people, in less government and more individual responsibility, we are not the extremists. The slogan of the John Birch Society is less government and more individual responsibility in a better world. It's as far from fascism as you can get. It's called secret. It's not as secret as my church. I spent quite a while in my church trying to get a list of members to tell them what the National Council of Churches was doing to them. It's not as secret as the American Farm Bureau, Federation, or the Elks, or the Masons, or your fraternity or sorority. Most of the charges that have been made against the John Birch Society are deliberate distortions, and that's a little bit scary to think of what the mass communication system can do to good people, to a good organization, because the image is bad out on the street. Most people who just read their newspaper, the Post, or Life, or Look, or Time, Drew Pearson, or Huntley, and Brinkley, have a bad picture. They go home and look at the boob tube and they don't know any more about it. What can one person do? You can do everything. You are the government. We get what we deserve. The best way I know to save our freedom, to save our country, is to join the John Birch Society. If you know a better way, you tell me what it is. I want to join it.